Hi, Volume 2, Story. This one is Part 1, Story 4, A Long, Long Lesson. That's what it says. Let me rearrange this everything. Put the book down where I can read it better. Okay. After many long, hot days of walking and many sad and lonely nights lying on the hard ground, Jacob at last drew near his journey's end. He was now in his mother's country, the land she had told him about so many times in his childhood. Now he was seeing it for the first time. One morning, as he trotted along in the warm sunshine, he looked, and behold, a well in the field. And lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. Glad to have someone to talk have glad to have someone to talk to after alone for so long, Jacob went over to the shepherds and spoke to them. To which city do you belong? He asked. Haran, they replied. Then you know Laban and his son Nahor? Jacob asked. We know him, they said. Is he well? So he's asking about his uncle. He is well, replied the shepherds, and behold, Rachel, his daughter, comes with the sheep. Eagerly Jacob looked at a beautiful girl coming toward the well with a flock of her father's sheep. Forgetting that it was now just high noon, and that nobody was supposed to open the well until evening, he rolled away the heavy stone and began to draw water for Rachel's sheep. Never had a lowly task taken Never had a lowly task like this seemed to be pleasant to him. Indeed, it didn't seem to take any time at all, not with this lovely girl smiling at him. How like his mother she was. The watering finished, he ran over to Rachel and kissed her and burst into tears. Then he told her that he was from her Aunt Rebecca's son, and she was so excited that she ran home at once and told her father. Laban came hurrying out, and when he saw Jacob, he embraced him, kissed him, and brought him into his house. Jacob spent a very happy month in Laban's home, and when his uncle suggested that he stayed longer and work for him, Jacob said he would. Then Laban asked him what wages he would accept. Just Rachel, he said, and wanted no other reward. He loved her so much. I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Laban agreed, and Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had for her. Jacob worked very hard for his uncle, as said later, in the days the drought consumed me, and the frost of night, and my sleep departed from mine eyes. Yet none of these hardships matter. He felt he could endure anything just so that he could have Rachel for his wife. 7 years drew to the close. Everything seemed to be going well. The wedding day was fixed, and Laban arranged for a feast. And then on top it has I'm thinking these are watercolors, and now I'm thinking again. But it's got a top page illustration. She and Rachel and the well. The main reason why they wanted it at the evening is because since it was high noon, the water would be boiling hot. And so that's why they would do it for the evening. Alright, let's get back to the story. Then Jacob suffered the biggest disappointment any man could have. After a crafty trick that, for downright meanness, matching Jacob's deception for his old father, Laban married him to his oldest daughter, Leah, instead of Rachel. You can imagine how angry Jacob was when he discovered he had been tricked. "What is this you have done to me?" he cried. "Didn't I serve you for Rachel, and why did you deceive me like this?" He didn't want Leah. In fact, he disliked her. There was something a matter with her eyes. Yeah, that's what it says. Maybe that's why she didn't marry before. But under the law of the land, he could not get rid of her. Poor Jacob. He was learning something he needed to know. What it feels like to be cheated. But a long, long lesson he was being taught that it never pays to lie and to deceive. And now we see Laban's character a little more clearly. He was a hard bargainer, if ever there was one. Yes, he told Jacob he would keep his word and let him have Rachel, but he would reprise 7 more years of service. 7 more years? It didn't seem fair, but Jacob agreed to his uncle's terms. There wasn't much else he could do. When the 7 years were up, Jacob decided to leave and return to his old home in Canaan. And he had enough. It has 2 heads, but one more than enough for this sentence. "Give me my wives and my children," he said, "and let me go." But Laban knew he was well off, and he begged him to stay. "For I have learnt by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake," he said. Once more Jacob agreed to stay, and this time for wages. But the next 6 years were not happy ones. True, he now had flocks and herds of his own, and these seemed to multiply more rapidly than Laban's. But Laban kept changing his wages. Laban's sons became more and more jealous of Jacob. They thought he was getting rich at their expense. So he talked it over with Rachel and Leah, and they agreed that they would be better for everybody if they should pack up and leave, even if they had to go without telling Laban, "One night the Lord appeared to Jacob and said, I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now rise, get thee out of this land, and return to the land of thy kindred." Oh, King James Elizabethan. This touched Jacob's heart, for Bethel is the place where 20 years before he had seen the ladder reaching up from the earth to heaven. How wonderful, he thought, that God still remembered the vow he made that night to live a better life. Now Jacob was quite sure he should leave Laban and go back to his old home. When Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives upon camels, and he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And then it has an illustration of them going off down at the bottom. And we got more pages to read because this is a long story. And Jacob stole away unaware to Laban the Syrian, in that he told him not that he fled. Oh, Laban was a Syrian, so Haran's in Syria. Okay, so that helps out a lot. Hurrying as fast as possible, he ferried his family and his property over the Euphrates and made for Mount Gilead on the border of Canaan. Jacob got a good start on his uncle, for it was not until the third day that Laban heard what had happened. Now it was Laban's turn to feel tricked, and didn't like it. Gathering a band of men, he pursued after Jacob, determined to bring him back. But on the way, God spoke to him in a dream and said, "Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob for good to bad." God knew that this was just what Laban was likely to do. Start out with pleasant words and end up with angry ones, as so many people do. Meanwhile, Jacob drove on as fast as he could, but with so large a family and so many cattle, it was impossible to keep ahead. At last, after a wild a 7-day chase, Laban caught up with him at Mount Gilead. "What hast thou done?" cried Laban, as he came puffing up to Jacob. "That thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried off my daughters as captives taken with a sword. Wherefore didst thou flee away secretly, and steal away from me, and doest not tell me, that I might have sent thee away with mirth and with song, with tabret and with harp?" In other words, Wouldn't it be a big parade if I was sending you off by? Okay, and that's the translation I remember. Okay? And hast thou suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Why have you not let me kiss my folks as they go? And that's King James, Elizabethan, fairly old English. Jacob knew that Laban had never intended to let him go, and that all this was making a farewell feast, and all this about making a farewell feast for him was just some more talk. So he gave Laban a piece of his mind. Ooh, he told Laban what if. After reminding him for all his long and faithful service, he said, This have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Except for except the Lord of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hast sent me away now empty. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight. Laban began to cool off, seeing that Jacob was determined to go back to Canaan, and there was nothing he could do about it. He suggested that they make peace. Jacob agreed, and as was custom in those days, they all began to pile stones to form some sort of memorial. Laban called it Mizpah, 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 meaning beacon or watchtower, saying, The Lord watches between me and thee when we are absent from each other. It was a happy ending to what might have been a serious quarrel. Early the next morning, they bade each other farewell, and Laban kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them, and they went back home. The reference for his sons and his daughters, that was the grand boys. And this is the illustration of Laban leaving Jacob. And that was the end of part 1, story 4. And we'll go to the next one here in just a bit.